Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, February 21st, 2020, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, I've got some bad news for some mainstream academics in various disciplines out there. I know they're going to be very upset, and they're going to have their Twinkies warmed up by their mommies and tucked in bed tonight because unfortunately for them, their peers in their own fields of discipline, archaeologists and anthropologists especially, have more or less put the coffin nails on the whole Bering Strait migration theory. And they don't know it because they have to operate within their own closed parameters. So they're always trying to make the evidence fit their preconceived notion, which is all theoretical. That was, it's the way they teach it as fact. And I was on the phone earlier tonight with Harry Hubbard, and I was talking about the Ice Age. And by the way, I think Randall Carlson is on Coast to Coast tonight. I could be listening to that, and I would love to listen to it, but I know at some point Carlson is going to say something about the Ice Age and ice sheets and all this kind of stuff, and I'm sorry, I'm just not going for it. And I was talking with Harry Hubbard about how it's so hard to break people free of this notion that somehow like the Ice Age is a fact when it's a theory, and a bad one, that wasn't without challengers. There's plenty of people who challenged it, but it's consensus science, like everything is a vote on their favorite theory, whatever that may be. It may be meritorious or it may not be. And again, it's all about this proof and proof and proof. When meanwhile, nothing is proved. Not even from any of the old theories, though they're getting rid of the Bering Strait theory now. So, but it's nothing that was proved. It was all hypothetical and theoretical to begin with. So, asking somebody else to prove differently is ridiculous. What people might find is evidence. See, evidence is not necessarily proof, but evidence that is circumstantial, that is related, that it's concomitant. It's whatever new evidence. Evidence is not necessarily proof, but may rise to a theory that's better fitting, you see. So we're not expecting proof in any way from us. So whenever you hear that from somebody, it's disingenuous from academics because they know there's no proof, and whatever it is that they contend isn't proof either, but they demand proof nevertheless. It's not proof, okay? It's evidence of something else that might have occurred, and there's other people who give risen to these other theories like this one, okay, that's put out by the Smithsonian. Look, I'm not professional or in any of these disciplines. I went to college, but for other things, and I've studied other things. But I've always been like an autodidact, and I've read reams of paper on these things. And look, if you want to see a really serious, I did one on the Ice Age, debunking the Ice Age, but if you want to really see a serious one, Harry Hubbard does one on his channel, which is, far superior. Mine barely scratches the surface, and I refer to his video on that video of mine too. And this theory as well mentions the Ice Age, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's actually preposterous what they say. But as I said, I'm not a professional in any of these fields, but I have done my own in-the-field research, and if you don't know about it, maybe you're a new subscriber, whatever, here I am up in the Green Mountains in Connecticut. There's me here, and I'm going to show you this very odd megalithic construction I found up there, and it's just fascinating to look at it, and the size of some of these stones. I mean, some of these stones weigh multiple tons. I mean, 5 tons, a ton. It's just huge, huge stone. It's just everywhere in this wall here, and it's very interesting how they tried to make the stones fit. And this is a lower wall there, but who's to say, if that was in the same time period, or who knows? I don't know. But look at this huge one on the top, not on the bottom where it would be easier, but on the top. I mean, there's a hill above, and the waterway here was deeper at one point. Look at some of these stones here. Just these slabs here are just immense, and the rest of it just sort of cobbled together. Just I don't know what it was, but I found this thing in the Green Mountains in very rural Connecticut near New Milford, where I was staying, not far from the flea bag motel that I was staying at, the only one in the area. And it's difficult to get around up there if you don't drive like me from the urban area, right? So, look, I'm not training, I'm college educated, but, and, I was a Dean's List and honors list student. I'm near genius IQ. I'm like the Goodwill Hunting guy, from that movie Goodwill, like Matt Damon in Goodwill Hunting. Only he was from Boston and I'm from New York. Just I have, very high intelligence, but I've done all my in the field research. I'm not just a guy reading articles and books and watching videos and then making my own videos or whatever. I've actually gone out and I have a lot of videos in this playlist on my channel. So if you didn't know, I mean, you can see some of these things. This thing was just intense, man. It's just in the middle of nowhere, and this whole area over there was like fairyland. It's just like early spring, and it was just this water and all these weird mound-like things all around. It's just very curious area, and there was a lot to see up there. But this thing was just intense, just like a megalithic structure in the middle of nowhere. I don't know who built it, but it certainly was interesting. And you can see that on my channel. As I said, and I go up to Vermont and visit with Jimmy, and we make some discoveries in Vermont there that nobody's ever talked about in the field looking at these walls at all. Some revelatory things. And whereas this article by the Smithsonian, um, which we'll get to in a second here, first of all, it has like 3 titles. So this is the magazine that I've been looking at in the library for so long now, and saying, for this past month or two, whenever they came out with it recently. And January, it was from January, that's what it is. And it's January's issue. And I've been looking at it and saying, oh, I got to read that. So I finally did. And some of the stuff that's in it is just preposterous, and you'll see why. I'll go over a lot of it, but just to sort of spoil it for you a little bit, what they contend is that, the peoples came to the Americas by boat sometime earlier than when they say that Bering Strait crossing may have happened. Okay, so the problem here is that it opens up a whole can of worms for for many disciplines, okay? Because if people came by boat 12 and 13,000 years ago, then they could come at any time from anywhere. So when you hear about the Vikings and the Chinese and the Celts and the Phoenicians and the Egyptians and the Greeks and whoever, if they came by boat 12, 30,000 years ago, then they came at any time by any of these civilizations in the past. And there seems to be evidence of that, okay, and the sort of transfer of, different kind of cultural things, whatever they may be. But who's to say what direction it came from? And according to them, that there was no human beings in the Americas at all prior to 20 or 30,000 years ago, and you'll get an argument from actual native people who say they didn't come from anywhere else. That happened after, and that's why we have that blood in us, is because that But we came out of this land. Okay, you'll hear very savvy, intelligent, well-educated native peoples from the Americas. So that's what they say. Okay, so I have a tendency to believe them if that's what they believe. It's based on all of this stuff that they know already. Okay. So whereas we're going to interpret it in a way that's different because they insist upon these preposterous things going on, and it's related to. I could have been listening to Randall Carlson on Coast to Coast tonight, but he was going to mention the Ice Age, and just not buying into that whole thing. And when I was talking to Harry Hubbard earlier on the phone, I was just saying it's so hard to crack people from this, and even with corn too. I mean, it's like right over people's heads, or it just doesn't mean anything to them, or whatever it is. But it's just impossible, folks. Corn is like an impossible plant. It's just impossible that it exists and have been created in a time period that it supposedly was created. It's just impossible. That's the problem for them, the mainstream. They're trying to explain it, but the problem with them explaining it always has to do with preconceived science, preconceived history, preconceived notions in any particular discipline, and trying to make it fit into that box instead of letting it speak for itself, because they know it's dangerous for their careers if they make anything that goes outside. But here are some people who, in their own peer group there, okay, mainstream younger academics doing anthropology and archaeology. So let's hear what they have to say. And I'm going to skip over the parts that seem absolutely preposterous to me. Maybe we'll read a little bit of it, but let me read at least some of this article. It's rather long, but you got to hear about some of it because it's revelatory here and speaks to so many different aspects of the sort of research that I do on my channel and a lot of other people's research for that matter. But again, we're going to parse it from the way that we see it, and they obviously are not permitted to do any of that. They must make it follow whatever narrative that they think best explains it, but they even make some admissions themselves. So let's read it here. So it's Smithsonian Magazine, January 2020. For more than half a century, the prevailing story of how the first humans came to the Americas went like this. Some 13,000 years ago, small bands of Stone Age hunters walked across a land bridge between eastern Siberia and western Alaska, eventually making their way down an ice-free inland corridor into the heart of North America, chasing steppe bison, woolly mammoths, and other large mammals. These ancestors of today's Native Americans established a thriving culture that eventually spread across two continents to the tip of South America. In recent years, however, that version of events has taken a beating, not at least because of the discovery of archaeological sites in North and South America showing that humans had been on the continent 1,000 or even 2,000 years before the supposed first migration. So, even here they're saying, supposed first migration, supposing. A subsequent theory known as the Kelp Highway, quote unquote, came closer to the mark. As the massive ice sheets covering the western North America retreated, the first humans arrived on the continent not only by foot, but by boat. So if they came by boat 12 and 13 and 14,000 years ago, folks, anybody from any civilization could have come here by boat at any time, and they did for reasons that are associated with many of the people who came here. Like the Chinese, for example. What's their big thing? Trade. What was the Phoenicians' big thing? Trade. Romans, Egyptians, trade. Vikings, Celts, trade. Trade and trade and trade and trade. Look, this is how people act in societies all throughout history, okay? It's just, and to tell everybody that these caveman people came here by boat and later civilizations did not is ridiculous on the face of it. Okay, you ever hear of William Bligh? Just as an aside, okay, from Mutiny on the Bounty, This guy ended up vice admiral, but this prick here, his crew got tired of being flogged or whatever. They wanted to do their own thing and live in paradise or whatever. The devil's in the details here, but this guy was set adrift in a 23-foot launch, right? Set adrift, the full boat of people who were loyal to him, part of the crew that was loyal to him, and then he navigated in this launch, this 23-foot launch, way down in the water, almost, capsizing. 3,618 nautical miles, 6,700 kilometers, 4,160 miles in open seas. Okay? Captain Bligh, William Bligh. This guy did this, right? And look, if he could do it, then anybody could do it, and whatever boat you could possibly think of. Okay, small boats, big ships, and they had them, like the Syracusia. Alright, so just don't even think otherwise, alright? So first of all, off the bat, I just wanted to say this too. This thing has like 3 titles, okay? So the title of the magazine, Tracking the First Americans, alright? Here's a search for it. Tracking the First, National Geographic must be like kissing cousins with the Smithsonian. And here's the Smithsonian, How Did Humans Come to the Americas? So it has like 3 different titles, which, why does it have that? So, not only by foot, but by boat, traveling down the Pacific shore and subsisting on abundant coastal resources. Supporting that idea are archaeological sites along the west coast of North America that date back 14 to 15,000 years. Okay? Just keep listening to what they say carefully, okay? Some artifacts found there. Paleolithic evidence of modified carnivore tooth from Yana River in Siberia, a spear point from Quadra Island where they're doing research off British Columbia there. A stone flake found at the island at Yeatman Bay. So, some artifacts dug up from this area. There's a picture of those people there. And one of them is from one of the native peoples there. And, they're entitled to that, obviously. And let's get past these commercials here, if I can. It's just cluttered up with a lot of stuff. I have a copy of it in my hands from the magazine. Okay, back to it now. Okay. Damn. I'll get there, folks. Hold on a second. Alrighty. Now our understanding of when people reached the Americas and where they came from is expanding dramatically. The emerging picture suggests that humans may have arrived in North America at least 20,000 years ago. Okay, I'm telling you, folks, didn't I predict this? It's just going to keep on going back and back, further and further in time. They knew it. I'm not the first one to say it or whatever, but I'm telling you that the research that they do is eventually going to lead them further and further and further back. And what are they going to say then? You know, talking about a different picture of the past than they ever could imagine, okay? According to them, when Göbekli Tepe was built, you know, everybody supposedly cavemen wandering around with flint spears. When meanwhile, the carving, all these, come on. They don't know what they're talking about. They just, everything's a guess based on what's inside the box. So at least 20,000 years ago, some 5,000 years earlier than has been commonly believed. And it's going further back, folks. We heard it in Charles C. Mann's book. And new researchers raises the possibility of an intermediate settlement of hundreds or thousands of people who spread out over the wide lands stretching between North America and Asia. So, whatever it is, they're getting this different picture of the past, and they're changing their minds on some stuff, but they still have to stay within their boundaries. The heart of that territory has long since been submerged by the Pacific Ocean, forming the present-day Bering Strait. But some 25,000 to 15,000 years ago, the strait itself and a continent-sized expanse flanking it were high and dry. That vanished world is called Beringia, and the developing theory about its pivotal role in the populating of North America is known as the Beringian standstill hypothesis. So this hypothesis of theirs is how the peoples there sort of evolved into the Native American peoples, because they have no other way to explain the differences in the morphology and the phenotypes and everything else that don't correspond directly to these people from Siberian Asian cultures, okay? And here we go into the DNA evidence, and you'll hear more here. Standstill. Okay, it's a standstill because generations of people migrating from the east might have settled there before moving on to North America for, they're not saying it, but long periods of time. Much of this new theorizing is driven not by archaeologists wielding shovels, but by evolutionary geneticists. Okay, evolutionary geneticists taking DNA samples from some of the oldest remains in the Americas and from even older ones in Asia. Those discoveries have opened a wide gap between what the genetics seem to be saying and what the archaeology actually shows. So there's this discrepancy there that's alarming to them. Okay. Humans may have been on both sides of the Bering land bridge some 20,000 years ago. Both sides. But skeptical archaeologists say they will not believe in this grand idea until they hold the relevant artifacts in their hands, pointing out that no confirmed North American archaeological sites older than 15 to 16,000 years currently exist. But other archaeologists are confident it's only a matter of time until older sites are discovered in the sprawling, sparsely populated lands of eastern Siberia, Alaska, and northwestern Canada, while there's been other archaeological finds in the Americas that date back even older than what they're saying there's no evidence of, etc. One of them is Sandia Man, probably, that Frank C. Hibben found. He was roundly criticized for what he found, and only dating it back to like 12,000 or 13,000 years, but this is the problem with the archaeology. They're finding evidence of peoples in the Americas, including South America, at earlier dates. So their only explanation of how this could happen is if they traveled by boat. That would get them there faster, you see. And that's what they're trying to compensate for in their theorizing about it, you see. But listen to what they say here. But other archaeologists are confident it is only a matter of time until older sites are discovered in the sprawling, sparsely populated lands of Siberia, Alaska, and northwestern Canada. And they're probably right. And here's a picture of uh, some sort of graphic illustration of the area there of Quadra Island where they're doing the research. And here's the high areas, the water areas. There's a lot of islands around this area. And, first thing you would come upon by boat, certainly, traveling there. And they show where it is here, kind of close to Alaska there. And, this is where they're going to find evidence of Bering Strait crossing stuff. But if they came by boat, it's, they're explaining the rest of the archaeology in the rest of the Americas at the same time. Dig sites near the coastline on Quadra Island where sea levels 14,300 years ago were about 650 feet above modern day levels. By 12,000 years ago, they were within 10 feet of today's. Okay, so why would that be? It's the whole, Ice Age explanation. And, if you read into Velikovsky work and Corliss, it's the waters came out of the earth, right? Like it says in the Bible and a lot of other people's mythologies or whatnot. That's because this is an electrical phenomenon. And also expanding earth. It goes into something that suggests this. We read into it a little bit more. It's an exciting, if at times esoteric, debate touching on basic questions we're all connected to, such as why people first came to the Americas and how they managed to survive. Yet no matter when or how they made the trek, the coast of what is now Canada was on their itinerary. And that's what brought me to British Columbia to meet up with a group of anthropologists who have discovered important signs of ancient life along the Pacific. The rugged shoreline of British Columbia is carved by countless coves and inlets and dotted with tens of thousands of islands. On a cool August morning, I arrived on Quadra Island, about 100 miles northwest of Vancouver, to join a group of researchers from the University of Victoria and a non-profit Hakai Institute led by anthropologist Darryl Fedje. The team also included his colleagues Duncan McLaren and Quentin Mackey, as well as Christine Roberts, a representative of the Waywai-Kum First Nation. Okay, so here's the First Nation peoples there. They have to be in on these things by law and whatnot. So, and of course, they're very educated people still, but some of their colleagues and other Native peoples not buying into everything they come up with. The site was located on a tranquil cove whose shores were thick with hemlock and cedar. When I arrived, the team was just finishing several days of digging, the latest in a series of excavations along the British Columbia coast that unearthed artifacts from as far back as 14,000 years ago, among the oldest in North America. On Cobble Beach in a nearby forest pit, that was about 6 feet deep and 4 feet square, Fedje and his colleagues had discovered more than 1,200 artifacts, mostly stone flakes, a few as old as 12,800 years. All testified to a rich maritime adapted culture, rock scrapers, spear points, and simple flake knives, gravers, and goose egg-sized stones used as hammers. Fedje reckoned that the cove site was most likely a base camp that was ideally situated to exploit the fish, waterfowl, shellfish, and marine mammals from the frigid sea. So it's just a base camp. Okay, but maybe repeatedly used. So they show a fellow digging there at the Quadra Island site, and it looks like this rock shelter area, which is often you're going to find these rock shelter things are all over. There's some here on Long Island. It's actually called a place on Long Island here called Shelter Rock. Similar feature. Supposedly what they call a glacial erratic. Hardy har har. I don't think so. For Mackey, the archaeological riches of the British Columbian coast reveal a key flaw in the original Bering Land Bridge theory. It's biased towards an inland rather than a marine route. People say the coast is a wild, nasty environment, said Mackie, a stoutly built man with an unruly gray beard and battered green hat, as he took a break from using a screen to sift through the rock and earth from the Quadra dig site. But you have lots of food resources. These were the same people as us, with the same brains. Okay, so people back through history and antiquity have the same level of intelligence as we have, right? Just think about that. And we know that in Japan, people routinely move back and forth from the mainland to the outer islands by boat as long ago as 30,000 to 35,000 years. Okay, so they're going back and forth in Japan and they're going everywhere. That's how it is with people, you know? It's not such a difficult thing to understand if you think about it just a little bit. Several recent studies show that as the last ice age began to loosen its grip, portions of the coastline of British Columbia and southeastern Alaska were becoming ice-free as far back as 17,000 to 18,000 years ago. Veggie and others note that humans walking across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia could have traveled by boat down these shorelines after the ice retreated. People were likely in Beringia early on, says Veggie. We don't know exactly, but there certainly is the potential to go back as early as 18,000 years, and I'm sure way before that. Okay, so these are the atlantals that are so common in the paleoarchaeology in the Americas. Left a spear point, presumably launched by an atlantal. Right archaeologist Duncan McLaren takes a sample of Quadra Island sediment. Studying the sediment helped researchers learn that the shoreline wasn't stable for a long time after the last ice age, so it wasn't stable. As I said, a lot of ads. Veggie, McLaren, and Mackey stressed that one of the main goals of their decades-long investigations has been to document the ancient culture of British Columbia's indigenous coastal communities. But in the opinion of many of their North American peers, the trio's cutting-edge techniques for finding coastal sites have also put the men in the vanguard of the search for the first Americans. And I always say this use of the first Americans also refers to C.W. Ceram's book, The First Americans, which was all about suppressed archaeology, about habitation in the Americas going further back in time, you see? And that was 1971, and that was very controversial for Ceram to say those things, and was not criticized by anybody because, it just was not, it was very hard to do to somebody like him who wrote the first book for laymen on archaeology in elsewhere on the planet. Today, the coast of the Pacific Northwest bears little resemblance to the world that the first Americans would have encountered. The lushly forested shoreline I saw would have been bare rock following a retreat of ice sheets, and in the last 15,000 to 20,000 years, sea levels have risen some 400 feet. But Veggie and his colleagues have developed elaborate techniques to find ancient shorelines that were not drowned by rising seas. Their success is hinged on solving a geological puzzle dating back to the end of the last ice age. As the world warmed, the vast ice sheets that covered much of North America to a depth of 2 miles in some places. Nobody knows how they figured out 2 miles or whatever. They just making that up. Began to melt. This thawing, coupled with the melting of glaciers and ice sheets worldwide, sent global sea levels surging upwards. So I'm sorry, people have different explanations for these things. This one is the one that's taught in schools and everything else, and it's just nothing but a theory. They have no way of proving this. All they have is evidence that seems to show something of the sort going on, but they have no proof, just related evidence, and that's only anybody's going to ever have. And just that other theories might be better. Okay. Artifact shelved by type at the University of Victoria. A biface is a stone implement flaked on both sides. A multi-directional directional core is a tool used to make weapons. Okay, so they have these tool-shaped objects that are for flaking. And Saram we found out in the first American, I read to you that it took a very, first they thought it was a painstaking thing to make flake point weapons and everything, and it took a very long time for these people to do these things, so it is very precious to them for those reasons. But a researcher showed that these things could be made in a matter of minutes if you know what you're doing. And that's the reason why so many of them were found left around and they weren't recovered by them. They thought they should have been recovered, but they couldn't figure out why they were left around everywhere. Well, that is because they could be made in a very short period of time, like minutes. At first, it's hard to get your head around it, says Veggie, a tall, slender man with a neatly trimmed gray beard. Oops, what happened? Okay. The land looks like it's been there since time immemorial, but this is a very dynamic landscape. That dynamism is proved to be a blessing to Veggie and his colleagues. Seas did indeed rise dramatically after the end of the last ice age, but among many stretches of British Columbia coast, okay, it keeps jumping around here. I'm sorry about that, guys. All right. It's the ads. Ay, ay, ay. Sorry. All right. Where was I here? All right. So Slender Man, I knew this land looks like it's been, but it's a very dynamic landscape. That dynamism proves to be a blessing of Veggie and his college. Seas did indeed rise dramatically after the end of the last ice age, but along many stretches of the British Columbia coast, that rise was offset by the Earth's crust. Get this, the Earth's crust springing back in equal measure. So this theory of theirs is ridiculous on the face of it, and I'm sorry, I'm just not buying this at all. Just not buying it. And it's a very dubious claim here, and they don't really provide a good explanation for it. They're just throwing it out in the wind, I guess, but it's crazy, and I don't believe it for a minute here. I'm sorry. So the Earth's crust was springing back in equal measure. Along the Hakai Passage on the central coast of British Columbia, sea level rise and the rebound of the land almost perfectly canceled each other out, meaning today's shoreline is within a few yards of the shoreline 14,000 years ago. So this is their explanation for it. The ice was pressing, the 2 miles of ice so heavy it was pressing down on the crust of the earth, and when it finally left the crust of the earth sprang up by magic, I guess. And unless there was some other phenomena going on, like expanding Earth and the ice sheet had nothing to do with anything, just a completely different phenomena going on, and it's evidence of it. But they have to stick to the ice age because that's another theory. It was a good one up until this Bering Strait theory went out the window. Uh, you know, this one went out the window, but hey, that ice age one, that one's good. No, not good. See Harry Hubbard's video. In order to track ancient shorelines, Fedge and his colleagues took hundreds of samples of sediment cores from freshwater lakes, wetlands, and intertidal zones. Microscopic plant and animal remains showed them which areas had been under the ocean, on dry land, and in between. They commissioned flyovers and laser-based LiDAR imaging, which essentially strips the trees off the landscape and reveals the features, such as the terraces of old creek beds that might have been attractive to ancient hunter-gatherers. And this whole thing about hunter-gatherers, look, if this was just, this area that they're researching here was just sort of a temporary place to do their hunting and fishing or whatever they're doing, and there were people on their journey elsewhere or whatever, okay? Like all the explorers that came to the Americas, well, you're doing this exploring, whatever. You're not exactly setting up house and planting vegetable gardens or whatever. You're engaging in hunter-gathering behavior yourself, okay? In later times, in whatever, the 15th century and the 14th century and the 15th, you're doing the same thing, right? In the 15th century and the 16th century, you're exploring, right? So you set up camp, right? A base camp somewhere, and you hunt and you gather, and and then you take the on-board ship again and move on. So, yeah, were the Europeans who were doing explorers here hunter-gatherers? That's what they were doing, but were they hunter-gatherers? No, they knew about farming and agriculture, obviously. It's ridiculous to suppose otherwise. So why they have to say that, I don't know. To jump to that conclusion is, in my opinion, quite frankly, preposterous. Okay, these techniques enable the archaeologists to locate with surprising accuracy sites such as the one on Quadro Island. Arriving at a cove there, Fedji recalled they found numerous Stone Age artifacts on the cobbled beach. Like Hansel and Gretel, we followed the artifacts and found them eroding out of the creek bed, Fedji said. It's not rocket science if you have enough different levels of information. We're able to get that needle into a tiny little haystack, they say, but again, this whole thing is where you have to make the evidence fit your preconceived notions of history, or else I think is sort of limiting. Yeatman Cave on Quadra Island, British Columbia. The appearance of this area suggests that humans lived here a long time ago, maybe even thousands of years. Maybe, and they like to use that word maybe, and it's all okay, but the problem is that what they teach is not maybe. They teach definitely when they teach in public schools. And like Harry Hubbard said when I was talking to him early on the phone, this didn't start until the 70s when theories suddenly became facts. So they took the word theory out of there so it would become fact. And that's why a lot of people have problems with this. They have problems with corn. They don't think much of it or whatever, but folks, corn is just impossible. Just impossible to have been created by primitive people 8,000 or 9,000 years ago in the highlands of Mexico. Just impossible. It's not even possible for us to do it, or we would have done it already. In 2016 and 2017, a Hakai Institute team led by archaeologist Duncan McLaren excavated a site on Traquair Island containing obsidian cutting tools, fishhooks, a wooden implement to start friction fires, and charcoal dating from 13,600 to 14,100 years ago. On nearby Calvert Island, they found 29 footprints belonging to 2 adults and 1 child, stamped into a layer of clay-rich soil buried under the sand in the intertidal zone. Wood found in the footprints dated back roughly 13,000 years. Okay, trying to get past this advertisement. Other scientists are conducting similar searches. Lauren Davis, an archaeologist at Oregon State University, has crews from San Diego to Oregon using imaging and sediment cores to identify possible settlement sites drowned by rising seas, such as ancient estuaries. Davis' work inland led to his discovery of a settlement dating back more than 15,000 years at Cooper's Ferry, Idaho. That find, announced in August 2019, meshes nicely with the theory of an early coastal migration into North America. Located on the Salmon River, which connects the Pacific via the Snake and Columbia rivers, the Cooper's Ferry site is hundreds of miles from the coast. The settlement is at least 500 years older than the site that had long been viewed as the oldest confirmed archaeological site in the Americas, Swan Point, Alaska. So this is far inland and down into the U.S. territory here. And see what I'm saying? So as you know, again, I keep on saying this on my channel again and again. It's just whatever they just haven't discovered it yet, and it keeps on moving further and further and further back in time. Pretty soon, it's going to be so far back in time, it's going to be saying, "What is going on here?" Early peoples moving south along the Pacific Gulf would have encountered the Columbia River as the first place below the glaciers where they could easily walk and paddle into North America, Davis said in announcing his findings. Essentially, the Columbia River corridor was the first off-ramp of a Pacific coast migration route. An axiom in archaeologists, and listen to this, their own axiom here. Listen to this, and this is especially goes out to those third-party people who believe that theories and hypotheses are facts, when the academics themselves don't even believe that they're facts. But you have this third-party people who believe they're facts, and it was mentioned by Charles C. Mann in his book. It was mentioned by one of the archaeologists or anthropologists that was doing research in South America that dated possible civilizations going back 30 and 40,000 years. Okay, this is why they're coming out with this now. You see, because it didn't make sense. But before this, you would have been burned at the stake to suggest anything else, as if they did complete and thorough archaeology, and they know that they didn't. It's just politics, folks, and bad politics is that, with a bunch of people who should not have the jobs that they have. Those who seek power are often the very people who shouldn't have any. Okay? An axiom in archaeology is that the earliest discovered site is almost certainly not the first place of human habitation, just the oldest one archaeologists have found so far. And if the work of a host of evolutionary geneticists is correct, humans may have already been in North America's side of the Bering Land Bridge about 20,000 years ago. So they were already here, according to the DNA, which who knows how good that is, but it's bearing this whole thing out. S.K. Willerslev, who directs the Center of Geogenetics at the Globe Institute at the University of Copenhagen and holds the Prince Philip Chair of Ecology and Evolution at the University of Cambridge, sequenced the first ancient human genome in 2010. He has since sequenced numerous genomes in an effort to piece together a picture of the first Americans, including a 12,400-year-old boy from Montana, 11,500-year-old infants at Alaska's Upward Sun River site, and the skeletal DNA of a boy whose 24,000-year-old remains were found in a village of Malta near Russia's Lake Baikal. And I think they showed the lake here, maybe. Or this is the island, I don't know. Yeatman Bay, near one of the excavated sites at Quadra Island, North British Columbia there, so looks beautiful there. With a very interesting landscape. Yeah, you know, if you're seafarers and going along the coast of the Americas here, you might settle in some areas, but you realize you have this huge mountain range that travels along all of the Americas here. You might not want to go, might not want to go up into the mountains so fast before you establish your communities and get into your agriculture. Again, these people just, traveling along the coast, and they show like hunter-gatherer, behavior. Well, that's what happens, when you're traveling somewhere and you got to stop and stay there, and in the interim, maybe stay there for a while, but, it doesn't mean that you're strictly hunter-gatherers. It's just that you're not practicing agriculture at the time. You see? that possibility exists just as well as the other. They have no idea. I'm just saying it because that's what they've been trained to say, like trained seals. According to Willerslev, sophisticated genomic analysis of ancient human remains, which can determine when populations merged, split, or were isolated, show that the forebears of Native Americans became isolated from other Asian groups around 23,000 years ago. After that period of genetic separation, the most parsimonious explanation, he says, is that the first Americans migrated into Alaska well before 15,000 years ago, and possibly more than 20,000 years ago. Willerslev has concluded there was a long period of gene flow between the Upward Sun River people and other Beringians from 23,000 to 20,000 years ago. There was basically an exchange between the populations across eastern and western Beringia, Willerslev said in a phone interview from Copenhagen. So you had these groups hanging around in Beringia, and they are to some degree isolated, but not completely isolated from each other. You had those groups up there on both sides of the Bering Land Bridge around 20,000 years ago. I think that is very likely. But you got to listen to some of the other stuff they say that just bears credulity about, the whole theory here that they're coming up with. Okay, so I'm trying to avoid these articles here. The whole genome analysis, especially of ancient DNA from Siberia and Alaska, really changed things, says John F. Hoppaker of the University of Colorado's Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. Where do you put these people where they cannot be exchanging genes with the rest of the Northeast Asian population? Could humans even survive at the high latitudes of Beringia during the last ice age before moving into North America? This possibility has buttressed by studies showing that large portions of Beringia were not covered by ice sheets and would have been habitable as Northeast Asia came out of the last ice age. So again, you have to, in your own research, make of this what you make of it, and just forget about the whole ice age thing. Whatever they mention about it is some other occurrence, some other phenomena that's going on, some sort of cataclysm and catastrophe going on that they're just not acknowledging. Scott Elias, a paleoecologist with the University of Colorado's Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research, used a humble proxy, beetle fossils, to piece together a picture of the climate in Beringia 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Digging into peat bogs, coastal bluffs, permafrost, and riverbanks, Elias unearthed skeletal fragments of upward of 100 different types of tiny beetles from that period. Okay. Comparing the ancient beetle fossils with those found on similar landscapes today, Elias concluded that southern Beringia was a fairly moist tundra environment that could have supported a wide variety of animals. He says that winter temperatures in the southern maritime zone of Beringia during the peak of the last ice age were only slightly colder than today. The summer temperatures were likely 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. People could have made a pretty decent living along the southern coast of the land bridge, especially if they had knowledge of marine resource acquisition, says Elias. The interior of Siberia and Alaska would have been very cold and dry, but there were large mammals living there, so these people may have made hunting forays into the adjacent highlands. Proponents of the Beringian standstill hypothesis also point to a cluster of remarkable archaeological sites on Siberia's Yana River, located on the western edge of Beringia, 1,200 miles from what is now the Bering Strait. Situated well above the Arctic Circle, the Yana sites were discovered in 2001 by Vladimir Petulko, an archaeologist with the Institute of the History of Material Culture in St. Petersburg. Over nearly 2 decades, Petulko and his team uncovered evidence of a thriving settlement dating back 32,000 years, including tools, weapons, intricate beadwork, pendants, mammoth ivory bowls, and carved human likenesses. Based on butchered animal skeletons and other evidence, Yana appears to have been occupied year-round by 500 people from 32,000 to 27,000 years ago, and sporadically inhabited until 17,000 years ago. Petulko and others say Yana is proof that humans could have survived the high latitudes of Beringia during the last ice age. So this is other people's making case for the Bering Strait crossing just in general. But to say that they came by boats is just incredible revelation and opens up a whole can of worms in Pandora's box about the whole question of whether peoples were coming back and forth from other civilizations to the Americas. And it just, if they did back then they most certainly did at any other time. Yet the ones who made it across the Bering Land Bridge were apparently not the people of Yana. Listen to this. William Sleeve's lab extracted genetic information from the baby teeth of two boys who lived at the site 31,600 years ago and found that they shared only 20% of their DNA with the founding Native American population. Only 20% share with the population. William Sleb believes Yana's inhabitants were likely replaced by and interbred with the Paleo-Siberians who did eventually migrate into North America. Sure, everybody and their mother, and my Aunt Tilly from Sheboygan. All right. Once in the New World, the first Americans, probably numbering in the hundreds or low thousands, traveled south of the ice sheets and split into two groups, a northern and southern branch. The northern branch populated what are now Alaska and Canada, while members of the southern branch exploded, in Willis Slev's word, down through North America, Central America, and South America with remarkable speed. Such a movement could account for the growing number of archaeological sites dating from 14,000 to 15,000 years ago in Oregon, Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida. Far to the south at Monte Verde in southern Chile, conclusive evidence of human settlement dates back at least 14,500 years. I think it has become more and more clear, based on genetic evidence, that people were capable of much more in terms of spreading out than we thought, says Willis Lab. Humans are very early on capable of making incredible journeys, of doing things that we, even with modern equipment, would find very difficult to achieve. And he's right about that. And it goes even further back than anybody possibly imagines, in a different world that nobody knows anything about. These people will never admit to. In Willis's view, that what primarily drove these ancient people was not the exhaustion of local resources. So listen to this. The virgin continents were too rich in food and the numbers of people too small, but an innate human yearning to explore. I mean, in a few hundred years, they are taking off across the entire continent and spreading into different habitats, he says. It's obviously driven by something other than just resources, and I think the most obvious thing is curiosity. That's right. That's what would drive them in boats across the sea at any time, any period in time, throughout all of the millennia and centuries and whatever you want to call it. That's what's been going on, folks, for a long time. People from everywhere. And look, at later dates, the main thing, these people who were established in the Americas, the one thing they were experts at was agriculture. It's clear as day from all the research done in South America and in North America here, in Charles C. Mann's book, okay? And the gathering of other resources, whether it be copper, timber, fur, you name it, food resources, the potato, all these foods that they didn't have in these lands, okay, that supposedly came there later or whatever, and based on whatever baloney history you could see right away from this whole thing, the revision of the whole Bering Strait theory and crossing and all this kind of stuff, is showing that their theories on these things are just antiquated, outdated. The evidence is showing different things, and they finally have to admit some things. Okay, some archaeologists like Ben A. Potter at the University of Alaska Fairbanks emphasizes that genetics can only provide a roadmap for new digs, not solid evidence of the Beringian standstill theory or the settlement of the Americas 20,000 years ago. And until there's actual evidence that people were in fact there, then it just remains an interesting hypothesis, he says. Well, just like one before it. All that is required is that ancestral Native Americans were genetically isolated from wherever the East Asians happened to be around that time. There's absolutely nothing in the genetics that necessitates the standstill had to be in Beringia. We don't have evidence that people were in Beringia and Alaska then, but we do have evidence that they were around Lake Baikal and into the Russian Far East. So, this guy's being honest and truthful about it. Is this whole standstill theory thing could be just a bunch of nonsense, and it's pure speculation is what he's trying to say, and I agree. After Potter unearthed the 11,500-year-old remains of two infants and a girl at the Upward Sun River site in Alaska's Tanana Valley, among the oldest human remains found in North America, Willerslev sequenced the infant's DNA. The two scientists were co-authors on a Nature paper that supported long-term genetic structural in ancestral Native Americans consistent with the Beringian standstill model. But Potter thinks that news stories on these and other findings have been too definitive. One of the problems with the media coverage is its focus on a single hypothesis, a pre-16,000-year-old migration along the northwest coast that is not well supported with evidence. Potter remains doubtful that humans could have survived in most of Beringia during the bitter peak of the Ice Age about 25,000 years ago. Across the board, he says, from Europe all the way to Bering Strait, this far north area is depopulated, there's nobody's there, and that lasts for a long time. If you believe in the Ice Age. But some scientists retort that the reason no sites older than 15,000 or 16,000 years have been discovered in the easternmost Siberia or Alaska is that this sprawling, lightly populated region has seen little archaeological activity. The area now defined as Beringia is a vast territory that includes the present-day Bering Strait and stretches nearly 3,000 miles from Verkhnysak Mountains in eastern Siberia to the Mackenzie River in western Canada. Many archaeological sites at the heart of ancient Beringia are now 150 feet below the surface of the Bering Strait. So that's where a lot of your evidence is, and who knows evidence of what else. Ancient sites are often discovered when road builders, railway construction crews, or local residents unearth artifacts or human remains. Oh, you mean like what's going back in the late 19th century with all the giant, accounts? Yep, same sort of thing. Activities that are rare in regions as remote as Chukotka in far northeastern Siberia, it means nothing to say that no sites have been found between Yana and Swan Point, says Batuko. Have you looked? Right now, there are no archaeologists working from the Indirgurka River to the Bering Strait, and that's more than 2,000 kilometers. These sites must be there, and they are there. This is just a question of research and how good a map you have. So this Russian guy being brutally honest about it. Hoffaker agrees. I think it's naive to point to the archaeological record for northern Alaska for Chukotka and say, oh, we don't have any sites that date to 18,000 years and therefore conclude that nobody was there. We know so little about the archaeology of Beringia before 50,000 years ago because it is very remote and undeveloped, and half of it was underwater during the last ice age. 5 feet down the pit on a wooded road to Quadra Island, Darrell Fedge is handing up stone tools with good cheer of someone hauling heirlooms out of grandmother's trunk in the attic. From the pit, illuminated by powerful lights suspended from ropes strung between trees, Veggie passes the most promising items to his colleague, Quentin Mackey, who rinses them in a small plastic container of water nailed to a tree and turns them over in his hand like a jeweler inspecting precious stones. Just like Jimmy does in his property there, Jimmy the Paleo Mountain Man, where there's just artifacts everywhere. And what people think are primitive artifacts, and I've said it, I've given some examples on my channel where, mainstream archaeologists have dug up artifacts that look like nothing to anybody's, quick glance. But when looking at them more carefully, they're carefully carved things. It's just hard to make out unless you have an eye to see these things, okay? So, again, this is what the sort of things they're doing. And just talking about the artifacts found there. Here are some of them. I don't want to make this go on much longer. It's been very long, but I wanted to report to you guys their changing of their theory about the Bering Strait crossing and the fact that they talking about them coming by boats. And if that's the case, people have been coming here the whole entire time. All these evidences of people coming, yes. Okay, and as I was saying before, you have a lot of people here. This is why it wasn't colonized per se. Okay, there's evidence of people from other societies, other cultures, other civilizations being here in the Americas. Well, there's good reason for that. Okay, similar to things that people, as this article explains, people of the same intelligence have been doing for years. Okay, when you establish trade, trading partners over long periods of time for resources that are necessary to the expansion of your society, for the survival of your society, for the everyday activity of society, those relationships are going to develop certain dynamics, okay? And one of them is going to be security interests and securing the resources that you're going to acquire, okay? So it will require often somebody representing your interest in the area where these things occur, you see, to maintain that good relationship, all right? And you would establish not a colony, okay, but a trading zone where you have a partnership agreement, okay, a friendly partnership agreement to ensure that this relationship is in good standing. You see what I'm saying? And if people would come here from all these different civilizations over the centuries or whatever, in the millennia, is because these relationships and evidence of them are found here, and the interaction and the diffusion of the cultures, okay, is because of these relationships, okay, like everything that's ever happened in history elsewhere on this planet. Okay, so this is the honest objects from the honest site gives clues into the civilization that once thrived there 32,000 years ago. Okay, again, guys, it just the article's pushing it further and further and further and further back in time, and it's just no time at all before it even goes further back. Okay, so it's just the native person is talking about it's promising there, and look at what they say. 5 years ago, I would have told you that you were full of crap if you were suggesting there were humans in Alaska or far in northeastern Asia 20,000 or 25,000 years ago, says Goebel. But the more we hear from geneticists, the more we really have to be thinking outside that box. That's right, fella. That's right. And here, Michael Waters, director of Texas A&M Center for the Study of First Americans, which has found pre-Clovis sites in Texas and Florida, says Fedge and colleagues have come up with a brilliant strategy for finding game-changing artifacts where archaeologists have never searched. It's some of the most exciting stuff I've seen in years, Waters says. I'm rooting for them to find that early site, despite their colleagues not wanting to find it. As scientists debate people in America, it's worth noting there could be more than one right answer. I think current evidence indicates multiple migrations, multiple routes, multiple time periods, says Torben Rick, an anthropologist at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. That's right. So, given that this statement is made, that means anything goes, folks. Okay, Rick began his, okay, I don't want to get into Rick here and whatnot. I don't give a crap what Rick says. All right? And regarding sites in South America that date back more than 14,000 years, could humans have traveled there by boat, perhaps from Oceania? It's a question researchers have had to consider, but Rick says the theory doesn't pass the smell test because it's unlikely that people then were capable of crossing an open ocean. Hardy har har. I just told you about William Bligh, ding-a-ling. Still, he notes that scientists don't know much about prehistoric watercraft because they were made of perishable materials. We could say, ha, that idea doesn't work, but I can't tell you exactly why those early sites are there, he admits. Human ingenuity is incredible. I would never underestimate it. So, again, guys, your take on this is as good as theirs because it just, the Bering Strait crossing migration theory is toast. It's done. And all the naysayers to other cultures and civilizations visiting the Americas in the past, well, they're all done too, folks. So I wanted to get to the Smithsonian article. I know it was quite lengthy here, but I needed you to hear all this stuff because, this is where it's at. People are wandering around out there right now thinking about this Bering Strait crossing being the only possibility. Well, there you have the admissions by the professionals there. They don't know. Okay? It looks like boat. And if they came by boat, anything's possible, folks, at any time by anybody. All right? So I thought you might be interested in that. I certainly was. And this is definitely necessary to all research related to this whole question about the Americas by anybody that's doing any right now. So I thought you might like to hear about this. All right, guys. So anyway, Bloodcat 7, I hope you enjoyed that. Please hit the like button if you liked it. And I will see you real soon with a new video. Bloodcat 7, over and out. Peace.